Thank you, Patricia, and thanks to you and Relina and Carolyn and all of the organizers of this important summit. I want to thank all of you for being here today, and a huge thanks to our panelists. And I want to start out our conversation just with an opening question for all of our panelists. I wonder if you can please share a little bit about who you are, how you know each other, and what your mentoring relationship is. How did you initially get to know each other? And how did your mentorship begin? Was it in an official or unofficial capacity? And maybe we can start with Meshell and Lauren.
Do you want to start?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to echo though, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel with Dr. Berliner. I'm excited to have this conversation, and it's always nice to have a reason to check in with her. So yeah, I think, when did we meet? We met back in, was it the summer of like 2014 or 2015?
Before you started the master's, so that must have been the summer of 15, yeah?
Yeah, and I think we just, Dr. Berliner reached out to me and connected with me. I think she'd seen some of my application materials. And so that kind of kicked things off for us. And then later I was in a class with you. And I think that's when we really got to know each other, taking that class together. And I think now that I'm teaching, I think I was a little bit of a trouble student, maybe in a good way, but I was definitely giving her some trouble, and she was very gracious and worked with me in figuring out the final. And I recently found I did 2 finals for your class, I think, or if it was a second class that I took with you, but I got to do like this really awesome creative like drawing. I don't know if you remember, it was like a video game, but drawn. And yeah, so that was a big joy. Yeah, I think that's how we really got to know each other. So I was in the program for 2 years.
So yeah, it's funny when I feel like we're on some sort of like 80s game show together. Well, I remember it. I don't want to say the dating game because I hate the way that dating metaphors are always utilized in academia. But I remember seeing Meshell's bio. I wasn't on the admissions committee, but seeing the kinds of things she was interested in and reaching out and trying to beg her to come join us in the Master's in Cultural Studies. And was just really lucky to be able to work with you from the beginning. And it's been an amazing journey to be able to spend, what has it been, 6 years with someone as we've both been navigating academia. And it's just really such an honor to be part of this group today. And I really appreciate the invitation and the organizing. Thank you to everybody. And you referred to me as Meshell's mentor, but I'm just like one of an amazing group of people that she works with. And it is always such I learn from you too, Meshell, like there are ways you mentor me. So it's this give and take, and what is just such a gift to have that kind of relationship. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's useful to say that in the last year, we've been doing something of an exchange with each other's pedagogy. So I think I reached out to you first to share some of your dissertation work with my graduate studies class. And then I did an interview with you for your class based on my work. And in between, in planning for these things, we talked about our approaches to pedagogy. And even just the other day when we were planning for today, we wound up kind of spinning off into a conversation about our different approaches to things. What would you do with this? What would you do with this? And so I guess one of the takeaways for me in this whole thing is, mentoring is this dialogical thing. It's not, the mentor mentors the mentee. It's like you're always switching positions and growing from each other.
And I believe we're still waiting for Meshell. Bill, do you want to tell us just a little bit while we're waiting about how you got to know Meshell?
Yeah, I apologize that Mitchell's not here, but I'm happy to give my side of everything about our relationship and sort of where it came to be. So in the intro, and many of you know me most recently as the Associate Dean, but before that and currently still, I direct the molecular medicine PhD program in the Department of Lab Medicine Pathology. So back in 2012 or 13, we recruited Meshell to our program. Again, he came by way of Western Washington, but it was originally from Oklahoma, where he's a Native American heritage. And so that's not very common in applied STEM fields at our university and really across the country. So there are different things that we had to discuss along the way in terms of mentorship and exposure to science and things like that. But I think those will be covered later on in some of the questions. More background about Meshell. I mean, he came in and he started working. He was always interested in aging work. We recruited him and knew he was going to work in that research area, not exactly which lab. And he joined one of our best labs, Matt Caberline's lab, who has employment both in our department as well as medicine, as well as biology, and did some real seminal work on looking at compounds that would extend the lifespan, healthy lifespan of worms, with an idea that we could then use that in translational medicine to do that in a geriatric patient. At the same time he was doing this work, he really took an interest to really pay forward all the work and mentorship that he'd received along the way. And so he was the spearhead of a large mentorship operation run out of the Caberline lab, where they mentored high school students, undergrads, kids from community colleges, to get them experience and hands-on experience so that they could then themselves see themselves as a scientist or see themselves as a potentially going to higher ed and potentially going to grad school themselves. And exactly what was just mentioned, you know, I've always done things like that, but Meshell took it to a different level, and I continue to learn from him and his interaction with some of these trainees as much as I think he probably learns from me. And it's evidenced by the fact that when he writes papers from his PhD time, he would have 20 co-authors, and every one of his trainees and mentees that touched some part of that experiment, they were recognized as a co-author. And so that alone then gives them an additional sort of leverage when they try to apply for the school themselves, that they kind of can recognize that they have already been committed to this and they're ready to do it. And he benefited from that, and now he's paying that forward. He continued here at UW as a postdoc fellow. And so my role as kind of a overall mentor to him towards his PhD kind of stepped back a little bit and became more of an informal mentorship relationship. My students know that once they were in our program, they can still reach out and ask for help and guidance. And I get calls every week for letters of reference or just advice and whatnot. And so he benefits that he's still here. He can walk to my office and have that conversation, or easy to get on the Zoom calendar these days. But no, we talk every couple months just about what he's doing and where he wants to go. And it's not a relationship that just ended because he finished his PhD. It's one that I'm sure will continue on for the rest of his time in science and beyond.
Thanks, Bill. And hopefully we'll get a chance to hear from Meshell later. And in the meantime, thank you. It's wonderful to hear a mentor being able to speak so much and so highly of their mentee. Maybe we'll start with now a question just for our mentors. What is important to you in a mentoring relationship? What quality do you as a mentor attempt to espouse? What actions do you as a mentor take? And does your mentoring a student of color change the ways in which you mentor? And if so, how?
I can start since I'm already unmuted, I guess. So I think it's important that no matter who you're mentoring, it's not one size fits all, and none of us are supposed to be creating mini-me's to go forward and follow our path to success. Every person has their own vision, their own interest, their own drive. And as a mentor, it's your job to sit back and listen and help the mentee discover what it is that it's their passion and their path. And it may not be where you are the most suitable person to be that mentor. And I think many of us need to step back and connect them to other people so that they get a sort of a mentorship by the village mentality versus just a single mentor. And so I think that what I do, both as a dean and as a program director, is kind of have multiple conversations over time about what people are thinking in their research, what they're thinking in their careers, and in life in general. And if I don't have all the answers, what I do have is I have enough of a connection, enough of a network to connect them to the people that can provide those answers. I think the other biggest trait that a mentor should have is one of listening. You know, you can't go in and already have a preconceived notion. You need to kind of sit back and listen and really take it all in. And again, I think as faculty, we're trained problem solvers, right? If you're just to break down what we do well, it can be in any field. Where we see a question, we answer it, or we design an experiment to answer it, or we design a question about and ask, and the answers to that will then move the field forward. And when you're talking about a student who's trying to figure out their path, if you're talking about a student who might have a mental health concern, those are not things that we as faculty are trained to fix. We are trained to listen and trained to research. And so we should do that with our students, understand the question and the problem wholly, and then provide them with the resources, and not necessarily the answers, but the connections to the resources. And so listening and being willing to understand that you shouldn't have all those answers. And your first job is to be compassionate and empathetic, and then be a connector.
I agree with everything that Bill just said, and I want to emphasize this: we're not here to be producing students in our image. That, especially for those of us who are interested in having a transformative culture, there's a lot we have to change in the institution, and that doesn't happen through reproduction, and never should have. So part of it is listening, as was mentioned, but also being okay sitting with discomfort and recognizing that, you know, if you're in a mentoring position, you most likely came up in the university at a different time, and regardless of your identity position, you may have been involved with and subjected to really different conditions, or may not have recognized those conditions at the time. And you need to listen to the students to understand how they're seeing things. And that's particularly true of our BIPOC students, and particularly if you are a white mentor. And the most important thing, I think, is to see yourself as a node, or like a connecting point, not as the answer, but as a person who just happens to be connected to other people in the institution. And you know more about the institution probably than the student does, because you just have been here longer. So who are the people, as the student is figuring out what they're interested in, who are the people that are going to help them on that journey? And that's, you got to think really broadly. It's not just who fits with their research questions. I also think it's important to be upfront, and not everyone feels comfortable doing this, but to undo the idea that you are a fully formed individual who has had, showed up, but we're born into tenure or whatever, that there's a way in which your experience has been a process as well. And in sharing about your own struggles, I have found students have told me that talking about my own experience with struggle is not parody to their struggles, but it opens up a space for questioning the university, for questioning the experience, for questioning, or for thinking through and working through our critiques of the university, and thinking about how to move forward. Yeah, that's all I have to say. And hi, welcome, Mitchell. It's nice to see you.
Hey, everybody. All to plan. This was a little bit, a demonstration of resilience that's necessary in your grad and postdoctoral studies. It's a little performance artist that I like to do. But seriously, thank you all so much for allowing me to come here and just answer questions and talk to you about my experience. I'm not sure where we're at, but I can be anywhere y'all need me.
That's great. Thank you, Mitchell. We're so glad to have you here. We were actually just concluding the question. Our mentors were just sharing about what's important to them in a mentoring relationship. And so maybe we can now hear from you and Meshell about what's important to you in a mentoring relationship. Is there a particular quality that a mentor has, or are there particular actions that a mentor takes? Is it an identity that a mentor has? And does your answer for any of these change in a cross-racial mentoring relationship? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in on that. Whenever I think about mentorship, I saw a great talk a while back that kind of talked about mentors and an identity kind of role. So, the mentors that I had, one was sort of like the champion. And the champion is the mentor that, like, maybe they're not as ground level, like you don't interact with them every single day. But if you need the big thing to happen, if you need the big name on this, or you need like somebody to come down and really be in your corner, they're there for you. So that's sort of I had a great champion in my PhD studies. And I also had somebody in my studies who was a little bit more like a coach, or somebody that I could go in and have day-to-day conversations with, somebody that I could just vent to. I could vent about the champion to the coach, and those two co-mentors actually work really effectively for me. And Bill is a third type of mentor, which has really helped me grow in a different space non-academically, and that's been invaluable as well. He's kind of had a dual role of champion in this space and coach to kind of help me along and get me thinking about things. So that's really kind of how I think about it. Mentorship for me has best worked as a team effort, because I do have different things that we need to caretake to in our mentorship. And my experiences with my champion and coach have been, they've left an indelible mark on me.
That's great. Thank you, Meshell. Meshell, would you like to add?
Yeah, I actually like the way that you're talking about the different kinds of mentor roles or relationships that can take place. And I really agree with you on that. And yeah, I think some of the things that I wrote down as far as like what I'm looking for in a mentor, and also finding myself in the classroom now as the instructor and really thinking about what it means for me to also be a mentor. I hold a weekly writing group, or it's kind of a daily writing group that I'm missing right now, and really wishing I was in that space, but also starting to realize how that's also a space of mentorship and really cross-racial mentorship. But thinking about holding space, so I know LB had mentioned space, and I think that's just really important, holding space for myself or for others. And the vulnerability piece is really key as well. Like the way that our deans opened up the session today, I think that vulnerability is really impactful for me. I think trust is a big thing, and being able to talk about trust. Transparency, I know that's something that was also mentioned already a bit, but being really transparent with your own journey and process. That's something LB has done with me. And I know she said she didn't want to talk about dating, but I can say that we do text. And I think that even just like texting brings on a certain degree of intimacy that really helps. And there's some mentors that maybe I text more than others, but like literally just knowing that you have somebody's number, I think can go a long way when that's the person that you need to reach out to. And patience and understanding, I think that's one of the biggest things that LB has shown me, as well as my other mentors that are in the space. I feel so lucky because there's so many of you here, and the folks that have just been really patient with me. And I think that like in the cross-racial setting, that understanding really, I think often boils down to that understanding that seeing myself still does matter. So I hear you all saying like not to create a mini me, but I think that there is still some power in actually seeing yourself. And so there's ways that I can see myself in LB, and there's also ways that maybe that doesn't happen. And I think that LB allows the space and provides the understanding of that there are other folks that I can go to for different needs. And leadership is big, right? So yeah, and I don't know, I one thing I wanted to add too is I got a little note card here. So lots of different thoughts that I was trying to put together. But I think what your mentor says, like at least for me as a student still, it sticks in your head. And maybe on the other side of that, it's like things that a mentor says, like it sticks in their head as well. But I think what's really, really nice is like when it's a text message and you can go back and read it and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what she said. Like, yeah, she believes in me. It's right here. Here are the words. Like if you ever start to doubt things, you know, or she wrote it in her book. She acknowledged me in her book. And so I can pull it out whenever I need to and fall back on that. I think, and right, the adverse side of that is that sometimes the not so good stuff will also stick too. And so again, having a space of understanding where you can bring that up and, hey, this stuck with me and I want to revisit this. So yeah, those are some of the things I was thinking of.
Thank you, Meshell. I have a question for all of you on the panel. So what do you think are some best practices in cross-racial mentorship?
Well, yeah, and so maybe just to expand on that, because I had like mentorship and then cross-racial, and I was reading from both sections. But with the space part, I think that one really key thing is like not forcing it. So I think that there have been times where mentorship has almost been kind of forced on me, and then I think that there's times where there's really space, and that's I think the thing that I love about working with LB is that there's like it's just a dynamic where there's moments where we come together and we're really close and involved, like over a whole quarter or during a certain project. And then there's moments where I think we can like kind of have some space and I'm allowed to do my thing and she does her thing. And when we come back together, there's like this understanding that that space is okay. That space isn't marking our relationship in any particular way. And really, I think it's nice, right? It allows for some things to breathe and we can come back and say, hey, remember what happened last quarter? Like, what's your new perspective on it? Okay, this is my new perspective on it. So I think that's key.
I'm actually like really interested to hear also from faculty of color and their experiences with cross-racial mentoring, because I feel like that's going to be like a whole other ball of wax. For me, in my experience, I think an important thing, and this may seem really obvious, is just like naming the fact that I'm a white faculty member. Like it's so funny how whiteness just doesn't get named. So often it's like, oh, well, it's obvious, right? But my positionality is going to be really, really obvious. I mean, hopefully obvious to all my students in terms of my race, but it's important for me to like mark that in conversation as well. So, and I hope that's something that my white faculty and staff peers do as well. So it's not just incumbent on the BIPOC student to assert their identity. I mean, the same thing goes for other identity categories as well, right? Not just race. So yeah.
And I wanted to build on that and say that, you know, none of us know what identity any person we're interacting with is bringing to that conversation at any time. And so what I hope we can get to a place is that people don't actually you're more intentional in different spaces than others. But if you're a good mentor and you kind of step back into the kind of themes I said earlier about compassion and empathy and listening, you can do that with everyone who you talk to. And if you start there and you're not afraid to start the conversation, then it can take you in the direction that's going to be supportive of the individual person who's in front of you. Similarly, you know, I'm now becoming an older white faculty member in our department in our school, and I use that privilege to then put myself in spaces where I can help and mentor people from underserved and underrepresented backgrounds. I go to SACNAS and Abercams every year, and that's not only a recruitment trip to bring people to the university, but it's to spend time walking the aisles and mentoring students who don't have anyone talking to them at their posters, and making sure that they feel like they're getting a valued experience out of that. And then some of those then turn around and become applicants to the University of Washington at large. But it's more about the mentorship there and letting them know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing to get prepared for grad school and maybe some other STEM career later on. But I do think if you can recognize that, you don't know what the issues are, what anyone's individual identity on any given day is, and so you want to be as inclusive to everyone you meet, and that goes for racial background and every other identity you can think of.
Yeah, so much of that I would just kind of follow up on, mirror a bit. I see so much of it is about environment and opportunity. So as somebody, maybe you're a PI in a lab and you have a student of color, creating that environment where those students and all students feel welcome and it's an inclusive environment is a huge part of it. I think another part is, a little bit like Bill was saying, having, let it, not forget that the individual is the experience and sort of the unit there. Every individual is different. Everybody's had different experiences. Everybody's going to be seeking different aspects of community, perhaps from new places. So much of the mentorship I think about when I think about UW for students of color is, my indirect experience, of course. But just seeing students come into a place that doesn't look like them and wrestling with that idea of community and together, and certain people, very sort of me as an individual, I never really thought about community. I never really considered those things, but I was never in a place where I felt like I was very, obviously and overwhelmingly different or anything like that. So creating a community, understanding kind of the broad nature of inclusivity, and then creating that space that welcomes the individual and kind of allows that individual to come to you in a certain kind of way. So that kind of comfort, I think, at the end of the day is most important.
If I can just add to one of the things that I was thinking a lot about is, at least for myself, I am always bringing a whole community with me or multiple communities with me into any space that I enter. And I think that a mentorship that happens that's cross-racial, it really does matter the reputation that that mentor has with other students like me. And I think that's something that, as a student of color, that I have to consider. Okay, this person may be treating me, well, or how I want to be treated, but are they treating other people who look like me the same way? Does my whole community back this person? Are they backing my whole community? I think that's a really important part. It can't, I appreciate what you're saying, Mitchell, but I also think that it can't always just be about the individual. I'm never stepping into a space just representing myself. I'm always representing multiple communities. So I think that I need a mentor who can also recognize that, whether it's through like the programs that I see them at, like, again, saying that I see so many of my mentors here in this space, or it's the research that they have, like LB's research. I feel seen, and my whole community as a person with an intersectional identities, like, feels seen in the work that she does. So I think that's important.
Thank you so much, all. Are there questions that you would like to ask of each other or of the other pairs? I'll give you a moment for that.
I wonder, Meshell, if there are ways that mentoring could be structured from the get-go to be most supportive for BIPOC students in cross-racial mentoring situations, or any situation. Like, and maybe this is for kind of anyone in the audience too, but like, I mean, is this something you thought about as you've entered new mentoring relationships in your different educational phases?
Wait, can you say a little more? What do you mean by the structure?
Like just even how you're introduced to that person, or the kinds of activities that are encouraged, or I mean the things that I think make our relationship strong are things that developed organically, and you can't force that, right? And I think that's what the other pair was saying as well. But are there things that can happen within a program that support, that you could imagine helping to kick off that relationship, so it's not 3 meetings of awkward conversations? Not that we had that, or any of my other students in the room. But that kind of like, who are you, who am I? If there are ways, and maybe this is a rhetorical question for the moment, but like, are there ways that we can think about setting some the groundwork or framework to make it to enhance the experience?
I don't know. I like that question though. And I guess I'm thinking a bit about, I guess I'm also thinking about peer mentorship, which we haven't really talked about here. And so I think that in some ways, if you can connect with a peer, and then I think that can often funnel you towards that person's mentor, advisor. But I think I have to think on that a little bit too, as far as, yeah, because I think I guess it seems contradictory, the part where it's like, don't force it, but then the structure, and so it's like, wait, I don't know. I think that yeah, I think I need to keep thinking about that one, but I appreciate that question.
So I want to make one comment just about a general practice that we try to instill, at least within our programs, is that people have a mentoring team. The historical part about getting a master's or PhD is that you learn at the knee of your mentor. And I think in all the conversations you've heard is that, multiple people take a role in kind of birthing a student to their next step. And that should be intentional. There should be people who are near peer mentors. There should be people in your life who can give you, career advice and research advice, but also life advice. And the idea, as Mitchell was saying, that you have a coach and you have a supervisor and you have a advocate, that person could be all in one, but likely you need other people, multiple people, to kind of give you that advice. Since I introduced Mitchell before he showed up, I do think sort of one of the things I want him to talk specifically about is sort of the role that he played as a grad student to pay it forward and really talk and elevate the research experience of undergrads and community college students, and sort of what his real motivation was for doing that. So I gave you my view of it as one of his advisors, but I think having Mitchell talk about it directly is probably more impactful than just hearing from me.
I'd first, to address the question there, thinking about resources and availability, having those kind of peer mentorship networks, getting larger communities of students together who all share common experiences, and then having PIs and departments and larger affiliates actually, have a monetary contribution to that and show their support for that. So those are some kind of, I think, ways that could help foster mentorship, maybe from the ground level up. Sorry. Again, apologies for being here a little bit late, everybody. My name's Meshell Lee. I'm a postdoc here at UW. I was a grad student just before. Visibly, obviously, I'm not a person of color, but I am a Native American. I'm very proud of that. And I have my own kind of intersectionality that is kind of interesting for me to think about and kind of interesting to explore, especially in light of where we're at and the things we're learning as a society altogether. One thing that's been a passion to me is mentorship. So as a grad student, I mentored just about 37 undergrad and community college students, primarily through South Seattle Community College. Community colleges was where I came up through. So I know the talent and the passion of those students. I know that it's not the only thing that they lack is an opportunity to show how brilliant they are. And I did that through my grad studies and showed that that was true time and time again with those students, or those students showed us that that was true time and time again, I guess, rather. And yeah, so I think, for me, it's about persons of color, it's about intersectionality, it's also about people who have been financially underprivileged. And so many of those things all come together and stack together, that, casting a wide net from people who are experiencing sort of, a lot of poverty going forward, I think has been kind of the best way for me to do really effective mentoring in people from international situations. So sorry, that's a little bit of a digression.
I love this idea of sort of spreading out what you are gaining from your experiences. And I want to also note like how amazing Meshell is, like remarkable at doing, having like an experience and then giving it like so much time and energy to the community to share what she's learned, and to building structures that don't exist within the university. And I see her doing that like at an exceptional level, and then also see other students doing this as well, is kind of building the structures within the university that don't already exist for them. And it's inspiring to see, and it also shouldn't be the only way that that happens. And so I like this idea that you're talking about too, about taking funds, opportunities for funds, and sifting them through the students who are doing this kind of work as well. So there, as Meshell, you said, like this peer mentorship, these models can happen so that you can have these spaces where you sit around and talk about who's good to work with, or what are those little nuggets of things that helped you, and what are the ones that harmed you. And like sometimes you just need your community to say like, quit that mentor, they're not good for you, right? Because that's part of it too, right? We're talking about good mentorship models, but there's a lot of like really toxic situations that exist as well. I've been in them as a mentee, and hopefully not as a mentor, but I have to be open to the fact that not everyone's going to like my style either. And so, yeah, so also thank you both of you for doing, outreach and community work in the university and outside. It's really important.
Thanks, everyone. I know we have folks from the audience who would like to ask questions as well. And I wanted to see if we could begin with, I think we had some hands up during the conversation. So maybe we can begin with anyone who had their hands up earlier, but didn't get a chance to ask a question. We would love to hear from you now. And I think Patricia is going to help me kind of keep track of the order of folks as they raise their hand. Oh yeah, Meshell, did you want to?
Oh, and Katie, I'm wondering if we can also, along with questions, also invite comments, because I think as LB had mentioned, I know I'm like fitting a lot of different hats right now, but it would be also nice to hear from instructors of color. Yeah.
I'll note that I saw, I believe, Miguel Morales, did you have a hand up before some of the other ones I've seen so far? So maybe we could start with you if you still have a question or comment.
Sure. So this has been fantastic, guys, and a lot to think about. So maybe I think a question that I had, which was, it's so important in an academic situation that we are not, as was mentioned, making mini me's and stuff like that. All of our lives are so much broader than academia. But I think one of the things that's been particularly in the forefront of my mind in this last couple of years, which have been really hard, is it's hard to see yourself as doing good work while being an academic. It feels like there's so many other things societally where you should be doing direct action. And part of this is me coming from physics, which is very indirect action. There is nothing there. That being said, there is a certain long-term influence and power of being able to have a more diverse faculty and a more diverse academia that is important, so you can do social work through your work. And so I'm trying to get to a question here, which is essentially, how do you find yourselves, maybe particularly in the last few years, trying to do that thing of listening and trying to encourage people to follow their muse, but then also trying to a little bit talk about how academia is an option that can maybe have impact in a different way than direct action.
So for me, I grew up in rural Oklahoma. I never met a professor or an academic until I was probably 20 something. I think there's tremendous power in academia. I think academia to me was always sort of like this light of enlightenment. Maybe I wasn't as close to it early on, but it still existed and shone brightly. So, I would think about like the tenure structure and what tenure affords in terms of academic freedoms for senior faculty. That's something that in my experience on DEI committees and doing other kinds of work is that there's a lot of junior faculty who are excited. There are a lot of students who recognize this as one of the important pressing issues we have to resolve in society. So the base of it, of this sort of a cultural reckoning, basically like a big fraction of us playing catch up in terms of how society operates. In this aspect of it, we have a lot of young people and a lot of younger faculty. I don't see as many more senior faculty stepping up to be champions in this regard. So that's something I think academia could almost change on a dime if a substantial number of senior faculty all got together and said that, yeah, we agree with this issue. We think this is an issue, and we'll put forward, effort and funds and really support making changes. That would be something I would say from as a non-PI.
If I could add, so very recently, actually, I had an encounter with a white male student, white passing male student in my class, or male passing student in my class, and I had all my armor up. I mean, he came at me, swinging basically, and virtually, and I had all my armor up, and after talking with him in office hours for like 30 minutes, I came to a point where I told him, though, I said, I really want you to leave out of this class having learned something. That's my goal for you. I really want to we were looking at a chart on how to be an anti-racist and going from fear to learning to growth. And he was like adamant that he was in the learning zone. And I was like, we're really over here in the fear zone. And also having to recognize my fear as well in that moment, like fear of racism, fear of sexism and homophobia and all of these different things facing this student. And but I told him, I said, I really want to see you in this growth zone at the end of this class. And for me, and I saw something register for him, and I think I really meant it too. I know I meant it. I meant it. And I mean that for all my students. And I think in that moment for me that day, that was direct action. It was something I did not want to be doing. There was a lot of anger or rage inside. And it really felt like my body was directly on the line. And I feel like I stood my ground, though, and I feel like we did get somewhere, and I do feel like we are going to get somewhere. And I also want to like push back again, though, on romanticizing that experience, because I think that it also is something that's still sticking with me in my body, and it is impacting me. And it, yeah. So, but yeah, for me, that was a direct action. And I did that, right, so that I can continue to hold a certain space in my classroom for my students of color and the marginalized students that I really am trying to show them, representation matters. Look at me, I'm at the front of the class. You can do this too. And, let me handle this other stuff, this BS on the side, but let me make sure to handle it so that it doesn't cloud that space and impact my other students' experience.
I also think that this question of mini-me is, I wasn't the person who brought it up, but I've thought about this as well. I think it, oh my God, my 6-year-old is barging down the door right now as I make a comment. I'll write in the chat.
I'll jump in and also recognize that that's our reality, right? We're all balancing kids and everything else. So good for her to take that priority. I want to echo a little bit what Mitchell said and Meshell said. We can make change if the faculty system kind of adopts to what the new reality is. Academia has changed since I became faculty, since I was a postdoc, since I was a student, and it's going to continue to change. And it's always, you know, as a young faculty member, you're like, well, I don't want to upset the boat, and I want to make sure I get promoted. And then when you become associate professor, you're like, well, I still want to be professor, or I want to be dean, or I want to be chair or something. I'll do it once I get there. Well, then you're going to turn around and be 70 before you actually start to make any changes. I think what's happening at our institution, and it's department by department or program by program, is things around professionalism, assessments of someone's mentorship capacity is being reviewed during your annual meetings with your chair, with appointments and promotions when you do come up. And now there's an incentive to start to do the work. Now it's upon the chairs and the A&P committees to make sure that it's not just lip service when those things are put into people's packages, that it is a real experience, it's a real change, it's a real effort that faculty bring in. And when they start doing it, the senior ones, then it will give space to the junior ones to not have to take it on, because junior faculty are already stressed, already trying to make ends meet, get the next grant, get the next paper, get the next course taught. And they can't also do all that other work, which is up until recently largely unrecognized. So as departments come around and start recognizing it, then I think we can make the change from the inside. And it comes with real intention, and it comes with funding commitments, and it comes with people to do the work. It just can't be sort of our people of color and, you know, the minority tax. We don't want to make everyone who already is underserved have to do extra work just to fix the system that's broken, that had nothing to do with them. And so I thank the departments that are doing that, and we need to see that more widespread across the whole university.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone. I think we have currently two more hands raised. So we'll hear from Bill Noble, and then we'll hear from Raylina.
Hi, thanks. I'm a professor in genome sciences. One of the things that as a mentor I've struggled with sometimes is acknowledging identities. As, you know, there's some trainees who are very forthright about what identities they bring to the table, and some that don't, and which is fine, you know, but sometimes it's important to know and acknowledge. And I liked LB's comment that, you know, you need to just offer it up yourself, right? Say, these are my identities. But I guess I would be curious to hear strategies for how to do that. You know, it's awkward if you're just looking at someone's latest research reports or results and saying, oh, by the way, I'm an old straight white man, you know, that it doesn't seem relevant at that point. So strategies for how to acknowledge it in a way that's, you know, not off-putting, maybe not seeming like you're sort of cementing your rank in the room would be helpful.
Most of the time you don't have to say you're an old straight white man, because they'll probably have guessed already. But I'm not saying that about you in particular, but I'm just saying about identities, we all kind of read each other, right, in any engagement. And I would, you know, defer to students for this, but I know for myself, when that is sort of called out in a space, even like, you know, as like a queer woman, like when I'm in a space where someone says like, hey, well, you know, I'm like a straight cis white guy, and this is my, it's like, I know that, but I also think that in them naming it, there's power to it that makes me feel more comfortable talking about my own positionality and my own identity. And I can imagine that being true for other people as well. Like, it goes a long way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, LB, it's making me think of, I remember I came to your office hours, I was sitting in your office, and I think I was just sharing something about myself, my own experience with my partner at the time. And you said to me, this is one of the things that stuck in my head. You said to me, you know, Meshell, homonormativity is a thing. And and of course I was like, what, big words, like, what are you talking about, what's going on here? But I think that it was through that conversation, and right, and like looking around and seeing pictures in your office, and it wasn't like you weren't like, by the way, you know, here's how I identify, but you were able to kind of talk to me in a way that showed that you understood my experience, you understood kind of a perspective that I was holding, and I think that opened up a lot for us.
I'll just add, Bill, that I don't know that it's you walk in a room and say, hey, look at me, like these are who I am, now I'm ready to be open to everything. It happens more organically during conversations. And, you know, from the listening standpoint, if you really need to listen to kind of the topics. So if a student comes into my office and they want to talk science, but all of a sudden we're talking about life experiences more than anything else, you kind of have to step back and realize that, yes, they need you as a science mentor, but they also need you as a sounding board for other things. And then the opportunity to show that it's a safe place for them to share, and you will share a little bit and see if they share some, and then you share a little bit more, and then eventually that might be where it ends, or it may become a more close relationship. And then it's always important to honor those stories with the people that are sharing them with you. You know, they stay with you, and you know, you may have to, you know, build in additional support networks around the department, but you don't need to share all the details about why you're kind of backfilling that support for a student. You just want to make sure that they see the support network, and that you're in charge of kind of bring all the structure there so that they are completely supported.
I love this idea of sharing stories, because yeah, it would be totally awkward if you or anyone walked into a room and was like, hello, my name is X and I am, you know, this identity, out of nowhere when you're supposed to be talking, you know, the conversation is about whatever, some research grant you're applying for. But as Rolina points out in the chat, that the more that everyone becomes comfortable with thinking about the relationship between the work they're doing at the institution and identity. So like recognizing that there is no non-identity, that like that historically in the institution, cisgendered, straight, white men have had particular experiences too. And that understanding that experience and those opportunities, or those systems, is useful to everybody, right? Like, I think we all can learn a lot from those, rather than sort of saying, well, I had this, this is all under the rubric of privilege and I shouldn't talk about it. It's like, well, what are those mechanisms? Because understanding them can help us to kind of shift them too. So there's contributions that can be had there too.
Yeah, one thing I would think about is, yeah, it can be awkward to, you know, try to be forthcoming in a space where, you know, yeah, it's just kind of difficult like that on both sides, you know, from a position of power, saying that is weird, from the position of somebody not in the power position, trying to tell you about who they are. Oh, it can be, yeah, like psychologically really hard. It can be something that you worry about, like, okay, I've told them this about myself. Am I impacting my career trajectory? Did I just change my recommendation letter? You know, all of those things. So I would almost think about an approach where you just kind of, or, you know, contemplate an approach. It can, you know, it doesn't have to be the only thing you do, but just do other things to show your values, you know, like bring in a speaker to Genome Sciences that's going to talk particularly about social inequity or something like that, or, you know, other relevant issues. Do, you know, maybe talk about like a book you're reading, you know, at lab meeting, you know, something like that, you know, different ways to just try to, you know, get a conversation going that doesn't cut straight to identity like that.
Thanks, Mitchell, and thanks all. Relina was next for a question. I'll turn it over to Relina.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say for the chat, we do have additional resources that we'll be posting at the end. Patricia has them, Monet has them, so don't worry about that. And we also are going to have, Bill and I are going to be hosting a session on mentorship in May, so you can learn more about this. So certainly more to come, more resources to come. But I wanted to, LB, you had asked about, for faculty of color, this experience. And I don't know if you were asking in particular in terms of mentoring students of color, or you're asking about mentoring white students. What was the question?
I think both. And I think that if we are calling this cross-racial mentoring, like there's a way in which faculty of color have to navigate working with white students as well. And so, you know, what is that like? Mm-hmm. And what is that experience? And, you know, and also working with students of color.
That's great. And maybe I'd love to hear from some of my colleagues on this as well. one thing that we didn't, I think, because we were so emotional at the opening, one of the things that we didn't say is part of the reason that we're hosting this this summit is because we've had this tremendous growth in the numbers of BIPOC graduate students, which is wonderful, right? And we'll hear, those of you all who go to our session with the data, we'll hear some of those data. And we have not had a tremendous growth in faculty. Right. And so this has not been met up. And so we have this demand for people to have some type of to grow their skills around these issues in a way that hasn't happened. Right. And I think that, I've been here for 16 years. The assumption was largely, and I think still to date, there have been, and I know there's a number of my departmental faculty members here. I don't know that there has been, since I've been, maybe there was one other faculty member who's advised a Black student in my department, an MA PhD student, since I've been here. And I think that there is a sense that, and I've advised a lot of Black PhD students, and I currently have 5 whom I'm advising. And I think there's a sense that the faculty members of color, right, and this is true for my other colleagues of color, that you've got that, right? So that's the person who's kind of got that, and we really need for our white faculty members to step up and to choose BIPOC students as their number one, right? And not to say, well, I know that Relina or Professor Nishime or Professor Gonzalez, that they have those, we've got that covered, but actually we are going to identify the student. And I do want to say that I have a number of colleagues that are also in this space that have done a wonderful job of stepping up to mentor, as Meshell is my advisor, to mentor our students. But I think that talking to faculty and faculty of color across the university, this is what I'm experiencing is not on my colleagues of color in my department, the communication department. This is not unique. This is true across the university. So we need folks to kind of reconceptualize, and this is so tied to that mini me, right? I'm going to reproduce myself, and that is in a racialized model. In very subconscious ways sometimes, right? This is how implicit bias works, but we see this is what's happening.
Thank you, Relina. And I want to return also to Meshell's suggestion earlier too, that we open it up for comments in addition to questions. So we'd love to hear your comments and additional thoughts as well. I don't see any hands up in the chat, but.
Can I respond to something? Thank you for your comments, Relina, and for naming the situation. And it looks different in every department too. One of the things Meshell mentioned earlier that I think is really important is a sort of endorsements from other faculty. So like I do see it as really important for faculty to really work together to share stories and connect. And it's important to me that faculty of color and staff of color that I work with know that I'm someone that they can send students my way and we can talk about it, and I'm open to feedback, and I want to be in conversation, right? So that like we can, if people are looking to people in their community, identity community, to say like this person is a safe person, faculty have to know if that person is a safe person or not. And that requires really engaging beyond just the meetings, right? Like it's about building relationships and trust, and that comes over time, and that's important work.
Yeah, the only thing I would mention there is just that, it sounded like a quantization almost of diversity. It was like, these are the professors that like meet our outreach quotas as a department, getting beyond these kind of issues as a box you check for a grant or that, to appease some funding agency is a big conceptual growth that, I think, we'll all do well when we progress beyond that.
We have some great discussion going on in chat. If it looks like we don't have any other hands up, so maybe I'll ask a quick question of you all, if that's okay. I think some of the most impactful mentor-mentee relationships, and this has been, I think, a common theme in all of your responses to each other, are those where the learning is really reciprocal. And so I wonder if you could maybe share a highlight of something that you have learned from one another.
I could share something I've learned from Meshell. One of the things that she's done so beautifully, and I would encourage other students to do as well, is to she's taken her criticisms of programs and experiences and been really vocal about them and offered her perspective at the same time. So early on, when we were in class together, Meshell looked around and was like, this isn't working for me. These things aren't working for me, but this is what would work for me. And so she did an alternative project where I think you redesigned the syllabus, yeah, based on how you would teach it, which basically was like, hey, why don't you, how would you do this, right? And in doing so, she actually, I learned about what she needed from the program, which helped me immensely, not just, maybe by the time that course ended, it was too late, but I think it was my first time teaching the course, teaching it other times. And mentors want to hear your feedback. We get student evaluations. We don't get mentor evaluations, at least in my program. There's a way in which most people are open to it. And if they're not, they might not be the person you should be working with.
Yeah, see, and now I keep getting I'm getting a taste of my own medicine now that I'm in the classroom too, right? And LB, you were so gracious in how I approached that, and having to remember that for myself as well as a student brings something up, being willing to hear and incorporate and learn from it. So I appreciate that you are a role model in how to do that. And I think something that I've learned from you, LB, and we talked about this in thinking about this panel, but back after I got into my the PhD program with Dr. Joseph and so many other comm folks that are here, I created this document that was like how to get into a PhD program. And I knew at that point from my 2 years of study, I knew that race, gender, sexuality, identity really was a key component of that application process. But I was still kind of speaking in this very post-racial rhetoric. And so now when I look back at the document, I remember being like, I'm trying to say something and it's not coming out the way that I want it to come out. And it took a few more years for me to say, oh, now I have the language to really see where I was struggling in writing that. But LB and I were on a panel together for folks that were wanting to apply to graduate school. And she also had a document. And I remember at the time when I read her document, I was kind of like, I'm saying something different. And I appreciate that there was this ability in that relationship to take a stance of I'm going to come at this a different angle. And talking recently, I realized too, because LB's my take was like, if you do the right thing, you'll get in. That's it. You just have to know the things to do and you'll get in. And Monet, I see you nodding your head because I shared the document with you recently though. So, and LB's document was more like, sometimes it just doesn't happen. And that's okay too. Like you try again. And so in thinking over the years and all this conversation that we constantly have, it made me realize that we were both kind of coming at the same issue of racism in applications for graduate school. But we were also still kind of saying it differently and maybe not quite right. And so as cheesy as it sounds, it's like I learned that I need her and we need each other in order to actually get to the root of the thing that we were trying to say. I needed her perspective. I needed to see where maybe I was seeing something different. I needed the space to be able to articulate my perspective. And we both needed to be able to have continued conversations to acknowledge where maybe it wasn't quite right, to see how it really could fit.
And we talked about this the other day when we're planning for this, and it's been years since we did that panel together, and we were able to talk about how the discourses have changed in the university, how the way that we can talk about and name things differently has shifted, and how we would write that document differently now. And so and it's just like thrilling to go to conferences and see you there and like be in the same space. This relationship, it like starts as this, meetings over a table or over Zoom with your mentor. But if it goes well, you're going to see them, I just was sending a video to a mentor from UCSD, of my kid talking about, what she should eat for her birthday the other day, like that relationship will continue.
Thank you, Albie. And I want to, unfortunately, we are out of time. This is such an engaging and enriching conversation, and I'm sorry that we have to draw it to a close. But I want to say thanks again so much to our panelists for all that you've shared. And I will turn it back over then to Relina and Patricia.
Perfect. Thank you so much to our panelists, Meshell, to LB, to Mitchell, to Bill, to Katie. We really, really appreciate all the time that you all took being with us today, and to everyone in the room. We're going to take a quick 13-minute break right now. We will stay in this Zoom room. Our next panel is called Wellness is an Equity Issue, which promises to be really wonderful and hopeful also, as I hope that you all heard all of the hope and energy in this panel. So we will see you all back in a little bit.
Thanks so much, everybody.